One of the weirdest things about doing the kind of writing that I do is that you spend a lot of time. You are going into archives, you're talking to people, you're really trying to get it right. And the desire, it's a kind of ambition, right, is to tell the definitive version of the story, to kind of trap it the way, you might pin a butterfly down. But the truth is that the story often keeps going, keeps evolving after you've written your story. And sometimes the writing that you do actually changes those events. I should say most of the time it doesn't. Say Nothing, my book about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, revolves around a murder that happened in 1972. At the end of the book, I name the murderer. It was somebody who'd never been identified before. And that person is still out there. They haven't been arrested. They're not in prison today. They never went on trial. So that's an example where I identified this person, but ultimately it didn't necessarily have an impact. I think it did have an impact in terms of people knowing who it was, but not in any criminal justice sense. My book about the Sacklers was different in the sense that I spent years looking into this family and their role in helping kickstart the opioid epidemic. Initially, there was an article in the New Yorker, and then this book, Empire of Pain. Part of what I was trying to do was create a situation in which the family couldn't disassociate itself from the downstream consequences of these business decisions they had made in terms of how OxyContin, this drug that they made billions of dollars from, was marketed. After the book came out, you had this sequence of events. There was a legal process, a bankruptcy case, in which the family ultimately agreed to pay billions and billions of dollars. And there was another kind of accountability, a sort of public shaming factor in a way, where you had documentaries that were made. There was an Oscar-nominated documentary, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, about Nan Goldin and her campaign, and I'd written about Nan in the book. And part of what Nan Goldin was pressing for was to have all these different art museums and these kind of illustrious, university halls and so forth, these very elite institutions that had the Sackler name on the wall, because the family had given hundreds of millions of dollars away in philanthropy, always with the condition that their name should be on the building or on the wall. And Nan Goldin, this revered American photographer who had been addicted to OxyContin, initially read the article that I wrote in the New Yorker and then said, I'm gonna start a campaign. I'm gonna try and persuade these institutions to take that name down. I wrote about the beginning of that in my book. There's an amazing moment where Nan, on a Saturday night, goes to the Guggenheim Museum, and she's brought along about 100 protesters. But they kind of arrive unannounced. They filter in ones and twos. That snaking ramp that goes up the Guggenheim, they kind of line that ramp. And at a particular moment that they'd agreed upon in advance, they suddenly throw out 7,000 little pieces of paper from the top of the atrium, and they all come fluttering down. And each one of these little pieces of paper was a little fake prescription, from the Sacklers of OxyContin. So you have thousands of pieces of paper pinwheeling down, and Nan, in advance, remember, she's a photographer, had told the New York Times, on Saturday night, you might want to have a photographer come to the Guggenheim, and at such and such an hour, just look up. And so you end up with this photo that's in the New York Times. She went from museum to museum, trying to get them to take the name down, and eventually they started doing it. And so you had a kind of domino effect. And I was actually with Nan Goldin at the Metropolitan Museum of Art just after they took the name off of the Sackler wing at the Met. And it was a really extraordinary feeling. I don't take any direct credit for that. I don't think that you can. But when I started working on the Sackler story, the Sacklers were moving through the world without any they weren't even getting asked questions about any responsibility that they might have had for the opioid crisis. And to see people like Nan Goldin kind of take the stuff that I've managed to reveal in my reporting and run with it more as activists, right? And sort of see what they can do in terms of bringing about accountability was an incredible, humbling, but also affirming thing.